Okay. So we sent out the new packet um, on yesterday, and the first page of it is just a continuation of a long Imrei, a long biurim. So we'll go to the second page of the new packet, which is on page Reish Nun Aleph, and he states as follows: Im hasachir makir beval habayis she'in darko lios biyado ma'os ela biyom hashuk. A person hires himself out as a worker, and he already has a past history with this particular employer, that the employer doesn't always have cash on him when work is rendered, but rather he only has cash on Mondays and Thursdays when he has to go to the marketplace. Okay, so Eino over alav afilu yesh lo mos shemin hastam niskar etzla al das kain. He says, since a pattern has already, in other words, this goes according to basically this halacha states that whatever accepted forms currently exist in pre-established, patterns, then you're not over on Baal Tolin by not paying him at the end of the day, if it's already implicit at the beginning of the work contract that you're going to get your payment, let's say tomorrow or next week. Okay, so this would explain or mitigate all situations where we don't pay our workers at the end of the day, because it's quite known that paychecks come not at the end of the day, but rather, at the end of a 2-week period or a 30-day period or however paychecks are issued. Okay, so shelo yifraenu ad yom hashuk, umiyom hashuk ve'elach imenu nosin lo umechamin ladcho, so over. So he says, and if so, but if the marketplace day does arrive, in other words, if it's regular payday, it's the day that the guy does expect to get paid, and then the employer just keeps pushing him off because he doesn't want to pay him for whatever reason, so then he may not be over on the Isser de Oraisa of Baal Tolin, which is only for that day, but he's going to be over on the Pasuk in Mishlei. Remember that we said that there's a pasuk in Mishlei which makes you in violation anytime a worker is expecting his pay legitimately and doesn't receive it. Below mishum balin, baltolin keven she'eno boker rishon. But you're not going to be over on the Yisr de Oraisa of baltolin because it's not that first pay period immediately after work was rendered. V'chein osan she'en darkan lifroa lepoalim ad shiyasu cheshbon imahim eno ovrim ad achar hacheshbon. And similarly, let's say you've already established a pattern with your workers that no one gets paid until we do a bookkeeping, we do an accounting to see, we have to go over your punch cards and we have to go over the hours worked, and we're going to do a full review of, the work period, and that's the way the employer runs his business. So when a person hires himself out to such a person, he already understands that he should not expect to get paid until after a certain period of time. And that's true even if the worker says, look, boss, I've put in for overtime, and so instead of paying me $1,000 you owe me, you really owe me $1,500. And the boss says, okay, I hear you. I just need to go over the books and make sure. Let me just look over the time cards and the work done, and I need to do an accounting first before I pay you. So he says, well, listen, can you at least give me $1,000 because you know that for sure you owe me. So I'm entitled to $1,500, but at least give me $1,000. So the boss can say, no, I'm sorry. When I give you your paycheck, it'll be the full amount, but I need to go over a full accounting. He says, Shekevin sheyadua shedarkan kain al das kain nisker etzla. And the reason why the worker is not entitled to even partial compensation on time is because when he went to work for the employer, it was implicit in the in the oral work contract that there was going to be a time lag between the work and the payment. So the bottom line is that you go according to current convention. You go according to what is implicitly understood when the employer is hired. In other words, usually you sit down with an employee in advance and you tell him, these are the terms of the work, this is how often you get paid, et cetera, et cetera. And then that's fine. And even if it's, let's say, a contractor who will come in, let's say once every couple of months and do the work, once you've already established a pattern of this is how you pay the guy, you don't have to repeat the terms every single time. It's implicit in the work contract that this is how he's going to get paid. Okay, so let's now take a look at Sifkat and Pei Aleph, She'ein Darko Lios Biyado Ma'os. So it says it's not normal for the boss to have money in hand at the end of every single workday. He only usually has money in hand on the Yom HaShuk, which is usually Monday and Thursday. Umehai Taima, Im Kolsas Chirosu B'Shabbos Kagon Rofe Shabala Bikur Eino Over. And that's the reason, same reason why if a guy does work on a weekend, where usually people may not have cash available or may not be able to, even if they give you a check, it's not cashable until Monday morning when the bank opens up. He says, you're also not in violation, even though we said, like in theory, a check is good as long as the guy can go to the bank. Well, what if the bank is closed? It's a vacation weekend or something like that. And he's not going to be able to get to the bank until Tuesday, and it's now Friday afternoon. So he says, that's understood. That when I went to work for you, I wasn't going to be able to cash the check until Tuesday morning. He says, and the same thing will be true, let's say, with Shabbos. If a doctor makes a house call on Shabbos. So a doctor is a perfect example. Joby, you have a right to demand payment immediately upon the rendering of services. Isn't there a sign in a lot of offices that says we expect copay at the end of the visit or something? Is there a sign like that in medical offices? Only if your OHIP card doesn't work. Right. I'm thinking about the US. In the US, right, there's the dentist.
When it's not covered by OHIP, whatever services.
Whatever services are not covered by OHIP. There's a sign at the reception that says payment is due, at the end of your visit. There's no such thing as we'll bill you anymore. That doesn't fly, right? So what happens if a doctor makes a house call or a chiropractor? Let's say that's not covered by OHIP. He makes a house call on Shabbos, and am I, the patient, going to be in violation of Baltolin if he renders the service to me on Shabbos because my back is hurting, and he helps alleviate my pain, but now payment is due? So the answer is no. Since it's understood between the two people, the chiropractor and his patient, that at Shabbos you're not in violation, even though payment is only the prohibition of rendering payment on Shabbos is only rabbinic law, and Baltolin is a biblical law. You're still not in violation if it's implicit in the work contract that he's not going to get paid until after Shabbos. Ubifrat the Yeshomim deshari litain mashkon b'Shabbos, and even according to the opinion that says that you're allowed to provide collateral to someone who's a creditor on Shabbos, mikol makom lo gara midin zeshem avur kan, the whole viodeya she'en biyad balabayis mos ela biyom hashuk de'eno over. He says, because since the service provider, the physician or the chiropractor in this case, knows that the guy doesn't have money on him, he doesn't handle money on Shabbos, you're not in violation. So it's the same thing here. Just like if I work for someone who I know doesn't have cash until Thursday, I don't have a right to demand payment on Tuesday. The same thing is true here. Because it was implicit that when I went to work for you, I knew that you weren't going to pay me right away. And therefore, this is all from the Minchas Chinuch, and therefore the Balabayas is not in violation. You're not going to be, if let's say Thursday comes, the Yom HaShuk comes, and the worker knows that even though he didn't get paid on the day he rendered service, but he does know that this is normally the time that he comes for his paycheck. If at that point you push the guy off, so then you're over on the pasuk in Mishlei, but you're not in violation of the biblical Baal Talmud. Kenu shitas Rashi b'nimuka Yosef v'chein perish atur v'ashulchan aruch u'dulo kahami'iri d'spirlei d'miyom ashok beilach over afilu mishum Baal Talmud. The Rav Stern just points out that it's a machlokes rishonim. According to the Meiri, you're even in violation of the biblical law. But he seems to be in the minority. It seems to be the majority of the poskim, including the Tur and the Shulchan Aruch, are of the opinion that you're only in violation of the scripture in Mishlei. Ad achar hacheshbon, if the convention is that I only pay my employees after I do the bookkeeping, so perish va'az im mechaven litchoso over mishum al tamar, avol mishum bal tolin eno over. It's only after the standard accounting period, if after he's done the accounting, then he pushes him off, so then he'll be in violation of the pasuk in Mishlei. Kevin shnei boker risham l'fi zeh im kavu shezman atashlam tamid u'lo bigmar hachodesh ela kagon b'zayin b'chodesh haba dahainu bi'ichur shel shiva yamim shuv ein bo mishum bal tolin. And it's for that reason that if, let's say, a guy finishes payment after a period of 30 days, but the boss says to him, payday is always on the 7th of the month, always on the 7th of the month, and you'll get paid for an entire previous month's work on the 7th, because we want to hold on to the all of the payables to our employees until we've been able to do all of the bookkeeping. It's a big company. We have a lot of employees. We need to go over and make sure that there's been no errors in the amounts. So then that's a legitimate thing that you can set up with every employee. That it takes a week for your paycheck to arrive after service is rendered. Okay. Shadarkam Kane, because that's the norm, that becomes the convention. Imlo shehaminag, and this is true, let's say, even if the worker says, well, give me a little bit, give me in advance, because I've rendered services and I just need some money on the 4th of the month instead of the 7th. You're not mechuyev to do that because it was already established that this was the way that we do business with our employees. And he just says it all depends on the convention. If the convention is to give a bit of an advance, which I don't know what he's referring to. I don't know of any work situations that go that way. But if there is such a convention that you give partial payment until you do the final bookkeeping and then you give the final amount, then that's also, the worker is entitled to that. Bottom line, it all depends on what the convention is. So, okay. Okay, let's see if there's anything here. Okay, nothing here. Let's go on to the next halacha. This is pretty straightforward. Anyone have any problem with this? It makes just intuitive, because this is the way we all do business. Okay, Yud Zayin. Ha'omer lishlucho, say uscharli poalim, b'sacharam. A man says to his foreman or his manager, go ahead and hire workers. Let's say we do that, we have a facilities manager. And we say to Jesse, who's our new facilities manager, we say, Jesse, you hire the people who are going to work in the facility staff, hire a team for yourself. Okay? B'sachram, and he goes and he hires them. Va'amar lahem scharchem al bal habayis. And he says, the owner of the company is responsible for paying you. So the halacha is that if the guy starts work and he doesn't get paid, shnehem einon ovrim al baltolin below sava. He says this is a loophole. This is a situation where neither the employer, the owner of the business, or the manager will be in violation if the guy does not get paid on time. Why is it? Because there was no one singular individual who was responsible for hiring and paying. One was responsible for hiring and one was responsible for paying. So he says, he says the employer is not in violation because he did not enter into a contract directly with the worker. And the manager is not liable because he's not, the contract was you're working for him, you're not working for me. So Ella Amar Lahem Shabalabayas Ite Lahem. All he said was that the employer will pay you. So technically, you found yourself a loophole in order to avoid being over on Baal Tolin. However, when we call Makom Balabayas over Misham Altamar Lareach Havagoyim, but there's still a violation of the ethical precept in the Proverbs in Mishlei that you cannot say to your fellow, come and work, and then you don't pay him. Im mechavein ledachosa. He says, if the intention is just to delay payment because it's to your advantage. In other words, don't do something that you know is nefarious just because you found a loophole to get out of the Isser de Oraisa. He says, if you still just want to be able to have the money accrue in more interest in the bank instead of paying the employee for an honest day of work, what you're doing is an evil thing, and it's in violation of the pasuk in Mishlei. The imsachrim stam below amar lahem scharchem al balabayis. But let's say the manager hired them without explaining to them that he was only a shaliach. Let's say he basically said, I'm hiring you to work at this company, and your wage will be such and such. And it's not implicit that he's not the owner, but rather just the manager. He doesn't identify himself as working on behalf of somebody else. So who chayef b'scharam, who over alo salin v'lo savo, ela im kain hapolim yodim shein hamalacha shelo. So then he, the manager, will be liable if they don't get paid on time. Because since the worker is assuming that he's the one responsible for paying them, then they are reliant on him to pay them on time. So it really does become the onus on the manager if they don't get paid on time, which is why it's necessary for a manager to identify himself as a manager. He can't say, represent himself as I'm your boss, and this is when you're going to get paid, yada, 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 without saying, and by the way, I don't own the company, and I'm not the one responsible for your paycheck. If he doesn't say that, then he is on the hook for the Isser Deoraisa if the employee doesn't get paid, which was always why it's to the manager's advantage to identify himself as an employee as well, right? Even though a lot of times that doesn't happen. Now, unless it's implicit, unless it's clearly understood that he's also wearing the same company work shirt that says staff or something like that, right? But a lot of times there are business owners who don't want to identify themselves as the owner because they want to be able to be incognito with their employees on the factory floor or whatever is going on. There's this show, I just saw a clip. It's called, what's it called? It's about where the CEO of a big company masquerades as a guy who wants an entry-level job. And I just watched the clip for the CEO of 7-Eleven. That it's a chain, and a big chain in the US. They have a few stores here in Canada, but it's huge, and there's like thousands and thousands of 7-Elevens throughout the United States. It's like Mac, right? They had the CEO of 7-Eleven going to apply for a job at a 7-Eleven, and he went to the stores that were most successful and went to the stores that were not as successful, and he wanted to just get an honest impression from the people who were managing the stores, like what it's like to work at a 7-Eleven. So he's the one that ultimately is responsible for every person's pay. But he went incognito, didn't want to. And it's very heartwarming because you see him, he's very humbled. He learns from the complaints. And then, like at the end, the people who really give all of their kishkas for their minimum wage job, he calls them into the headquarters in Dallas, Texas. And he says, I've decided to make you a manager of a chain of stores. And like the guy's all in tears. And Yeah, so it's very, very undercover boss. That's what it is, right? Is that what it's called? Yeah. It's very nice. It's beautiful. Okay. You ever see it? You never see, you don't know what I'm talking about. Okay.
Surprised I don't recognize him. You'd think he'd do a meeting annually and all the employees would sit in, but I guess not.
Well, when you're the CEO of 7-Eleven and you're in the headquarters, the international headquarters,
Yeah, maybe.
you don't know.
They're all coming in once a year for a speech.
Right. I mean, yeah. If you're running a 7-Eleven in Brooklyn, you're not going to go into Dallas to even once a year.
Right.
Okay. Anyway, okay. All right. So let's take a look at the Imrei Yaakov over here. So we're back on page Reish Nun Aleph. Ha'omer lishlucho. If a person tells his shaliach, or let's say his manager, his foreman, go and hire workers. Even lechatchila, you're allowed to dispatch someone to hire workers for you. And the reason you might want to do this is either because you run a very large company and you don't have the time to hire them on your own, or as we'll see in the next sif, there are even certain situations where you want to mitigate your concern that you may not have money available at the end of the work period. And in that situation, you want to rely on this loophole in the event that you end up not having the cash, which doesn't sound to be very nice. It doesn't sound to be very honest. So we're going to have to wait till we get to the next sif to find out, because even, if you're worried that you may not have money to pay them at the end of the work period, that doesn't seem very fair for you to hire them and tell them that you're going to pay them. So we have to figure out, we've been sort of putting that on hold because we knew we were going to get there. But in the next sif, we will discuss that issue. Lishlucho, you tell your proxy, Davka b'shliach da'alma. He says, this is only if the guy has nothing to do with the management or custodianship of your assets. Aval mishu hu apotropos al nechsei chavero, afsha hapolim yodim shein hamalacha shelo scharim b'stama, havi ka'omer scharchem alai over beval tolim. But let's say you ask someone who also has, what's the word I'm looking for? Power of attorney over your bank account, over your assets. So then, even though the guy hires them and doesn't tell them that I'm obligated to pay you, but it's as if he said to them, then it's my responsibility, because since the workers know that not only do you work for the boss, but you also handle his finances, they're reliant on this person, the one who's hiring them, to get paid on time. He says, and therefore you will, that manager will be over on Baal Tolim. V'chein isha sheyesh la Baal, v'noses v'nosenes b'soch habayis, v'sachar apoilim afilu b'stama overes mishum Baal Tolim. And therefore the same thing, a very practical example. A woman, perhaps it's not her money, it's her husband's money, but she hires workers, and the workers, let's say a housekeeper, and the housekeeper knows this is a very relevant issue for anyone who has someone who comes in, let's say once or twice a week, to clean the house. The worker expects cash at the end of the day, right? It's not okay for the balabusta to say to the domestic housekeeper, I'm sorry, my husband didn't give me cash this week. Well then, but you're still over on Baal Tolim if it's conventional for the housekeeper to get paid the $80 or $100, whatever you owe her, at the end of the day. The wife is over, because since she does control the assets, and she normally has control over the assets, she doesn't have a right to sort of push off the woman. Let's say her husband did give her cash, and she has the cash, but she's planning on going shopping. So she wants to take the money that she would normally pay to the housekeeper and say, listen, come back on Thursday and I'll pay you what I owe you. I'm not allowed to do that. Payment is due at the end of the day. Umenahel Mossad o Mifal shemutal alav tashlum haschirut lepoalim dino ka'opetropos va'over mishum bal tolen. So the guy who's in charge in the company of writing the checks, if he's the one who hires the workers and he also signs the checks, so he too, he's an administrator for the company, he also will be in violation of bal tolen. So I hire a foreman to not only hire the employees, but he also is empowered with paying them. So he also will be over on bal tolen if he doesn't pay them when payment is due. So we're only talking about a guy, let's say in an organization like ours, where the facilities manager has nothing to do with the accounting department. Like he doesn't control when they get their checks. It's got to go through another whole different part of the office, right? Which is what a lot of companies are like. There's the accounting department, and then there's the sales department. Companies have all different kinds of departments, right? Okay. And so the employee, the manager who's hiring the workers, if he says charchem al balabayas, he says, I'm your boss, but I'm not in charge of paying you. Your payment will come from the owner of the company or the accounting department. He says, so that's how you avoid being over on bal tolen. Afilu schar blastos b'shalom. And this is true, by the way, not only if I'm a manager of the company and the boss tells me to hire workers. Let's say I hire you to come work for me in my house. But let's say I'm just getting started off in my marriage and my parents are helping me remodel my home. So I hire a contractor. And I basically tell the contractor, the shver is covering the cost. my shver, you know what a shver is? Shver is a father-in-law. You guys are, you either are or will be one day a shver. Yeah. So shver also means difficult. So sometimes the shver is the Eberster also. Because if is the Almighty, because like that old joke goes, the father-in-law goes to his prospective son-in-law and says, how will you provide for my daughter? He says, the Eberster help him. God, the Almighty will provide. And so he goes back to his wife and he says, I like my new son-in-law. He thinks that I'm the Almighty. Anyway, so
very cute.
So anyway, so let's say this kid, this newlywed, hires the contractor, and he says to him, "Eberster is going to pay for this job." So in that situation, since the contractor, the worker, the plumber, whatever the person I'm hiring, has already been put on notice that I'm not responsible to pay him, even though he's doing the work for me in my own home. So then I'm not going to be over on bal tolen in the event that he doesn't get paid on time. And furthermore, the shver also won't be over on bal tolen because he didn't do the hiring. So this is a technical way. It's a loophole, right? Okay. V'yesh omrim the bechi hagavna yachol omer lo tul masha asisa b'scharcha k'dolakamen simin yud beis. We're going to see a later halacha where there are times when you can say to a worker, take whatever you need in exchange for your work product. We'll talk about that later. We won't look at that now. V'im amar lahem scharchem alai afilu hodiyim shehu shaliach bein hamalacha shelo mikol makom over b'val tolen. But if the manager, even though he's not in charge of paying them, tells them, I'm responsible for your pay, he sort of puts himself on the hook. Let's say a worker is a reluctant worker and he says, I haven't met your boss. How do I know that he's a reliable payer? How do I know that he's good for the money? So the manager says, don't worry, I've worked for this guy for 40 years. You can trust him. trust me, I'm responsible to make sure that you get paid on time. So if he does say that, even though it's ultimately the guy's not working for him, it will be over on Baal Tolin because he gave personal assurances. Okay, and this is where we'll hold it for today, at the very bottom of the page.
Shkoyach, Rabbi. Have a good day, gentlemen.
Okay, have a good day.
Take care.